So what advice do you have for other kids to help them also like to eat their greens?
Salad.
Salad? What sorts of things would you recommend that people put on their salad?
They could put cheese, tomatoes, carrot, and watermelon.
Watermelon?
Salmon.
That sounds good.
Oranges.
Orange slices? I love orange slices on salad.
Liking.
Ice cream?
Yeah.
Ice cream on your salad? That's your tip. That's what's going to get them to eat their greens. It might just work.
Yay!
Let me tell you this story. I once got a call from a parent who was frantic because their kid had eaten, get this, a scorpion. Fortunately, the scorpion was dead. Sometimes it seems like our kids will literally put anything in their mouth except what we want them to. If that describes your kid, if they would rather eat something like a bug than, say, a piece of broccoli, then this is the episode for you. Welcome to episode 28 of Eat Your Greens with Dr. Black. I want to give a shout out to all my returning listeners. Your support is what keeps me going. If you just discovered the Eat Your Greens podcast, welcome to the family. If you're confused about the best way to optimize your health or the health of your children, you've come to the right place. I'm Dr. Angela Black. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. I've been in practice for over 20 years, and I am passionate about discussing what the evidence has to say about eating a plant-heavy diet. Over the course of my career, I've seen the toll that an unhealthy diet takes on my patients and their families' health. And I wanted to do more than just give the standard 5-minute spiel in the office about eating more veggies. So I decided to start a podcast, and here we are. Now, I can tell that my families and patients are listening because of all the great positive feedback that I've been getting. And I know parents aren't stupid. Everyone wants to give their children the best possible start in life. And we all want our kids to eat more veggies and less junk food. But what we eat and why we eat it are determined by a whole host of factors that are complex and tightly connected to our environment. Things like where you live, your cultural background, your financial security, the amount of stress you're under. Often I'm called out by my parents and they'll tell me, look, Dr. Black, I really want my kid to eat better. I want them to eat more vegetables, but there are some obstacles in the way. And one of the most common obstacles is that their kid is a picky eater. Many of us have been there. In fact, my own oldest child, super picky growing up. So today, I'm thrilled to be joined by one of those parents. She's a mom of 3. She's a self-described picky eater herself, and she called me out. She doesn't need me to tell her that chickpeas are healthier than chips or peas are better than pizza. What she wants to know is not what, but how. How can she encourage her kids to accept and enjoy healthy food without the guilt and the shame and the tears that usually come with the standard heavy-handed measures, that old, like, you're not getting up from this table until you eat your broccoli method. It never worked in the first place. In fact, it may even cause more problems than it solved. Now, before we start, if you find this episode helpful, please share it with a friend or another parent who might benefit. For more episodes, or if you'd like more information about child nutrition and feeding, you can go to my website. That's www.eatgreenswithdrblack.com. If you subscribe to my email list, you'll get a free guide to getting started on your journey to better health through a plant-forward lifestyle. All right, well, that's enough of the intro. Let's hear all about this mom's story and see what we might be able to do to help our picky eaters. Thanks for joining me, Allie. Welcome to the show. Please tell me a little bit more about yourself and your family.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Black. So my name is Allie, and I am married with 3 kiddos. We have our oldest is nearly 8. We have an almost 6-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. So things are pretty crazy at our house. But first, I kind of want to give you guys some background on me as a picky eater. I am in the middle of three. I have an older sister and a younger sister, and I grew up in exactly what Dr. Black was talking about, the really heavy-handed, you will sit at this table until you finish your food. And I very quickly realized that I could just sit at the table and never finish my food because I did not want to finish my food. And so there were a lot of times when I would just sit there, stare at the meal. Dinner time was over. I would stay at the table, stay at the table, stay at the table. Eventually it was time for bed. So my food would get thrown away and I would go to bed. And to me, that was like how much I did not want to eat that food. But unfortunately, I don't think anybody in my family realized that it wasn't me wanting to be a picky eater. Like there was just so much more going on. And so that was just kind of how it went. And I became labeled the picky eater of my family. And I was known as being the picky eater when I would go to like extended family gatherings. And it just kind of always seemed like I was like a burden or of like, oh, well, what's Allie going to eat? What's Allie going to eat when we go there? And I very quickly came up with my own coping mechanisms of like how I'm going to get by. And I learned like, I just have a favorite at every restaurant that I go to, and that's what I always order. Or I remember being maybe 5 or 6. I feel like one of the main staples in my house growing up, which is hilarious to me because I would not serve that to my kids, is fish sticks. I feel like that was such a food of the 90s, right? Fish sticks. And I do remember eating like fish sticks and chicken nuggets and chicken and like deli meat. And then slowly I just like, I don't know what it was, but those were foods that like felt like unsafe foods for me anymore. And so I just stopped eating any meat. And that wasn't cool with my parents at all. But I just figured like something was going on and it just didn't feel safe for me to eat those anymore. And so I stopped.
And that's interesting because I get that question a lot, especially with toddlers. They go through phases where they don't want to eat their meat. And we are very focused on protein in this country. In fact, I think we're too focused. There are very few people who are actually protein deficient, and you can get all the protein you need from plant-based sources. And so when my families come and tell me like, oh, I just can't get them to eat meat, I'm just like, well, I have good news for you. You can take that off of your list of concerns. I am completely not worried about it. For one thing, toddlers especially come around. It's more of a texture thing, and they come around, and it's such a frequent part of the family meals that it's not usually a permanent thing.
Right.
But also you can just be so much healthier without a lot of meat. So, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And I'm like, if all my patients were picky in that way, I would be a lot less worried. It's the ones who will only touch the chicken nuggets and the mac and cheese or the fries and won't touch anything green with a 10-foot pole. Those are the ones I worry more about in terms of their long-term health. So I always like to start with definitions because it's so important to make sure we understand what it really means to be picky versus some other feeding disorders or feeding issues.
Right.
So one of the things that a lot of the parents will tell me is that they'll say their kid's picky, but they're talking about amount. Their kid will only take a few bites at a time. They'll eat a variety of food. They just don't eat much. And that's not really picky eating. And I'm also not too worried about that because what we think our kids needs in terms of amount. We're really trained to eat large portion sizes, especially in the U.S. Other countries do a better job of offering smaller portion sizes, but here it's like the all you can eat, the huge extra, what is it they do at the fast food restaurants?
Like size it up or supersize it.
Supersize it, exactly. And so we think when we see a kid eating what's actually a normal, healthy amount of food, we think that they're starving themselves, and then they get labeled as a picky eater. So that's another thing I tell parents, just cross that off your list of concerns. If they're following their growth curve, they're getting what they need. And it's actually better to let them learn to follow their own body's cues in terms of hunger and fullness. So when we talk about the definition of picky eating, the formal definition is a child's unwillingness to eat familiar or new foods that is severe enough to interfere with daily routines and the parent-child relationship. So this is the variety of food that we're talking about when we say that a kid is picky. Another piece of advice that I give to families, especially with toddlers, is I want them to get every food group over the course of a week. They may not get it on any one single day. That's okay. So if they're getting it over time, I'm happy. And another thing we have to be aware of is, when is it not just picky eating? What might be a sign that your child has a more severe feeding disorder? And that's going to be kids who have oral aversions that are extreme. They're so restrictive that they will only eat, one small group of food, and they're at risk of nutrient deficiencies, right? And this may be a sign that they have sensory issues or they're on the autism spectrum. There's a disorder called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder that I am going to talk about in my next episode. I'm going to sit down with a speech therapist who's a feeding therapist, and we're specifically going to talk about the disorder of ARFID. But babies who have reflux disease or food allergies and intolerance, these children may be excessively restrictive or they have reactions, and you need to talk to your doctor. You can go back. I did an episode specifically on food allergies and the difference between allergy and intolerance. So go back to episode 15 if you want more information about that. So like I was saying, when we talk about picky eating, we're really just talking about a kid who refuses maybe a certain group of foods, like often it's vegetables or a certain texture. They only want something that's maybe breaded and fried in nugget form. They won't eat something soft or soggy, but it's not so restrictive that it's having a severe impact on their health. Which kids tend to be pickier? Often it's a firstborn child. That wasn't the case for your family, Allie. You're the middle child, but it's your oldest, your son.
Yeah, that wasn't the case growing up, but definitely my oldest is by far my pickiest.
Boys tend to be more picky than girls as a whole. Also, kids who have difficulty regulating their emotions, maybe they have a diagnosis of ADHD, or in families where there's a lot of parental depression or anxiety, those kids tend to be a little pickier on average. We're talking about population statistics. That doesn't apply to any individual, but if you want to know across the board who might be at risk of being a pickier eater. Also, there are some factors that are associated with being less picky. Breastfeeding your child for more than 6 months, having children get regular exercise. Children with siblings may be less picky, although again, not the case in your family.
Not the case for us.
And then there's something called an authoritative style of parenting, and this differs from the authoritarian style of parenting, right? An authoritative parent is one who may set some boundaries and they encourage healthy food options, but the child's preferences and their hunger or fullness cues are respected. So there's some flexibility built in there. It's not so rigid. The authoritarian style of parenting is rigid, inflexible, my way or the highway. And that often backfires and you actually get more picky eaters versus a more flexible style of parenting. So, all my parents must be absolutely perfect. And myself included, right? Of course, I was the perfect parent.
We're all perfect parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I've told a story before about my youngest who has an epilepsy disorder, and she had to be on something called the ketogenic diet for epilepsy because she was having very frequent seizures. And this diet is super strict. It's managed by a registered dietitian, and every single meal has the exact same number of grams of protein, fat, and carbohydrate.
Oh my goodness.
She started it when she was 2 years old, and she was having 100 seizures a day at the time. These little brief, eye blinking seizures. It was affecting her development. And about every 2 weeks, we had to call the ambulance to pick her up because she was having a prolonged seizure that wouldn't stop, and we would end up in the ER. So it was a super strict diet because everything she ate had to be weighed on a gram scale. So one day I made this sheet pan of roasted vegetables.
That
sounds
amazing.
It was great. And I weighed out her little portion and she got it along with her high-fat food like bacon and heavy whipping cream that she would have to drink to get her fat up to go into ketosis. It was whatever. That's another story. But my oldest was a picky eater. And so she is yelling at me, "Why would you make this? It's terrible. It's disgusting. I hate this." And I'm losing my you know what, and I'm yelling at her like, you're going to die young, you need to eat healthier. And while we're having, like, this was not my finest parenting moment, right? Okay, just to show you that no, nobody's a perfect parent. While we're having this interaction, I turn around and Sarah is in the kitchen sneaking the vegetables off of the sheet pan. So I've got one kid who will eat anything but can't, and the other one who could eat all the healthy stuff but won't. And I'm like having a nervous breakdown right there, right? So it's
it's really crazy. As a kid, you have no idea that, like, when you're an adult, what your kids eat is just like, it requires so much mental and emotional power. Like, as a kid, you're just like, oh, I'm just going to eat, like, I'm going to eat this food. And you don't really think about it until you're an adult. And it's like how much energy goes into feeding your children. It's just crazy.
And if you're already tired and stressed out, your capacity to respond with wisdom and patience might be limited. Right?
Yes, 100%.
So when we talk about some tips that we're going to get to about how you can help your child, we offer this advice knowing that sometimes you're going to get it right and sometimes you're not. And, forgive yourself and forgive your children, and it'll be fine. Now, the next question is, why do we care? A lot of kids that start out picky will eventually go on to accept a wider range of healthy foods, right? Most of us adults who eat our broccoli wouldn't touch it when we were kids, and, we're mostly fine. So why do we care? What are some of the complications? So I'll just name a few and then we'll move on. But, my favorite F word is fiber. Anybody who's listened to my podcast episodes knows that I cannot go more than 10 minutes without talking about the importance of fiber in the diet. And that's for a lot of reasons. But the number one, of course, is constipation. And so I do see a lot of kids coming in with chronic stomach aches and, they can't go to the bathroom. Sometimes they end up with something called onchopresis. It's another thing I've talked about in a previous episode. Sometimes they can be restrictive enough that they're not getting enough vitamins. So some common vitamin deficiencies that we see in picky eaters. Maybe they're anemic, so low iron. Zinc is another one. Also, vitamins A, C, E, a variety of the B vitamins. These have all been reported in the literature as potentially being low in kids who are picky eaters. Now, weight is a little bit trickier. If they're really restricting, they might be underweight and not growing well, although that would be more of a red flag for me for one of the actual feeding disorders. More often, what I see is that they can be overweight because, unfortunately, what they're eating is going to be more of that ultra-processed food that's just going to contribute to higher calorie intake than what we really need. Now, not only the condition of being picky itself, but how the parents and society reacts to it could potentially set them up for an actual eating disorder when they're older, right? So especially that authoritarian style of parenting has been linked to higher rates of anorexia nervosa. Maybe there's binging eating disorder, can be associated with a lot of shame, blame, and guilt. And that can have a big impact on our mental health as we get older. So sometimes we see that. One of the most common effects, though, is going to be on the family's quality of life. And I know that you can talk a little bit more about that, Allie. How has being a picky eater or having a child who's a picky eater affected your family's overall quality of life?
I think mostly because I grew up as a picky eater and it was really tough. Dinner was really tough. It just wasn't enjoyable for me. And I'm certain it wasn't enjoyable for my parents. It just made eating out just not a good family experience. And I know that one of the things that is so heavily promoted and with good reason is family dinners as a time to sit down and connect and just process your days together and set goals, all of those amazing things that we need to connect as a family and to learn kind of those social skills and those connection skills. If dinner is a war, you're not ever going to teach those things to your kids. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that parents need to understand is that your child is not a picky eater because they want to be. Nobody wants to be a picky eater. That's it's hard. It's super hard to be a picky eater. And so I think that just acknowledging that hey, your kid is struggling with something and you can work with them to learn how to eat more foods and enjoy more food This is a learning opportunity, something you can do with your child. And it doesn't have to be at dinner. Like it can be at a time that is less stressful or less crazy. Like dinner time at our house is crazy with 3 kids. And so I just think it needs to be really seen as something you guys can work on together. I don't know. I feel like I could talk about this all day because I'm really trying to undo a lot of things that I experienced growing up with my own kid and trying to figure out like how to support him in trying new foods, having autonomy, and really even just like thinking through like, what is it about this food that I don't like? What am I feeling right now? Am I feeling safe? Like, am I feeling unsafe? And just all of those emotions that are tied up that you don't really think. If your kid's not eating that food, it's easy to be like, oh, they don't like it, but you just really need to like peel back every single layer of what's going on. And I just think a lot of people don't realize that.
It's an important point to keep in mind that the picky eating, well, eating in general is very much an embodied experience, and it's tied to feelings of, in many cases, joy and happiness and feelings of connectedness with the family, but other times, less positive feelings. And again, I mentioned the blame and the shame, but also just how we think about back in your life. And if you see a certain food, what kind of memories that can trigger, either happy or not, or sad or
so
unsafe. And so our food and our diet is just, it's all interconnected and very closely woven into our sense of self and our emotional and mental well-being. So, and that's why it's such a complicated subject.
It really is. Yeah. So many people, especially like it's really hard in our family because my husband, he loves food. He is such a foodie. Any single thing he would eat and he would love it. And I am the exact opposite. And I just like, I cannot relate to people sitting down and just like feeling so like emotionally, happily overwhelmed by a meal. I just do not understand that because I've never really experienced that. And so I just think it's really important to understand that like every single person has a different emotional takeaway from food.
I really love that point that you're making. And one of the tips for helping, I think this is very applicable. I think that mindfulness is a really amazing way to learn about yourself and to take away a lot of the preconceived notions that we have about things and really learn. So mindful eating is a powerful tool. If your child is old enough, and you could even start really young with this, the classic food that's used to teach mindful eating is actually raisins. So if your child is old enough to eat a raisin.
Oh, interesting.
The mindfulness teachers will pass out raisins to the group. And first, you just look at the raisin. You might feel it. Is it sticky? How does it feel? How does it smell? You just like gaze at it. Mm. And then you lick it or just put it in your mouth and you hold it there and you don't chew it. You just like, how does this feel on my tongue? What flavors am I getting initially? Like it can take you 15 minutes to eat this one raisin. And so eventually you'll kind of chew it and, it's a little, I can feel it sticking to my teeth. And now the flavors change, it's releasing more, whatever. So this is the classic mindful eating lesson is a single raisin. And you could do this with any food. Mm-hmm. But another thing, aside from just what's going on in your mouth, is how is this food making me feel? Not just in my mouth, but in the rest of my body. What am I thinking about it? Is it bringing up any feelings of joy? Am I happy about this sweet flavor? Am I, maybe I was raised by dentists who told me it's going to give me cavities and I have anxiety about eating, who knows? Paying attention to what's going on in your mind, in your mouth, and in the rest of your body as you eat food. And you can teach really young children to do this exercise. Just pay attention to how it makes you feel. You're not supplying them with any, you're not telling them how it should make them feel.
Right.
You're saying,
just asking,
lick this strawberry and just how does that feel on your tongue? What do you notice? So it might be a good technique. I think it is a good technique, not only to introduce new foods in a safe way to kids, but if you if you know that you already or your child already has a lot of strong feelings about things, it might be a fun exercise. And you start with something safe and
Right.
you gradually move to things that are less safe and just notice like why. And you might be able to discover like some joy, like, oh, actually, this does make me feel happy.
Yeah.
But you have to notice the joy as well as the sorrow.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting, especially just thinking about the personalities of my 3 kids. And I'd be really curious to see what all of them say. Just even like food aside, just acknowledging emotions and recognizing like just all the nuance that comes with feelings and what's going on and how am I feeling. That's like a huge thing that we're working on with my oldest. And so I'm really trying to connect that to food, but also just like in every moment of every day, like that is just so vital to like growing up and having an understanding of your emotions. And so that's like a huge thing that we're working on.
So this is a complete aside, but sometimes that's what makes these podcast episodes more valuable, right? So there is a practice called RAIN, RAIN, and R stands for recognize. So this can be applied to literally anything that you're going through. If you're having mental health issues, if you're having stress, just even if you're happy, you can apply it to positive emotions and negative emotions, and what you're eating. But R stands for recognize. So I notice what's happening and I'm aware of it. I'm just bringing it into awareness. A lot of times we're just not even aware of what's going on in our mind and our body. A is allow. Don't try to push it away or stop it. Don't say, oh, I shouldn't be having this experience. This is bad. This is a negative, I shouldn't be angry or anxious or fill in the blank. You just allow it to be there. It's a paradox that the more we push something away, the stronger it gets. So if you allow things to be as they are without controlling them, weirdly, some of the power can be taken out of those strong emotions. I is investigate. How does it feel in my body? Am I experiencing it as tension somewhere, tingling, heaviness, lightness, whatever it is? Like just explore your body and investigate how whatever fill in the blank thing you're looking at is affecting, because every single thing affects our body in a physical way, even emotions. You can notice, and we've all had that experience. If you're anxious, your heart's beating fast, your chest feels tight, right? Everything affects our body in a physical way. So investigate what's happening in your body. And then there's a variety of things that have been applied to the letter N. Often it's nurture. So offer yourself self-love with whatever's happening. It might be like not self. Don't take it personally. This doesn't make you a bad person. Don't, apply it. This is just what's happening in the moment. And then another N would be just notice. Just notice it. Okay, this is what's happening in my body in response to this thing right now. And if you cultivate that practice, it's very powerful in almost any situation you can think of yourself in. So that's my little mindfulness aside for this. Didn't expect this picky eating episode to turn into a lesson on mindfulness, but I think it's a powerful tool, and I'm so happy that you brought that up.
I think a lot of people just don't realize that how much like mental health and mental wellness is connected with picky eating and just food in general.
Absolutely. Some other strategies that are very commonly put forth in terms of helping our kids or ourselves eat a healthier variety of food are going to be things like, first of all, for parents, and this would be a harder one for you, it is set the example, right? Be a good role model. If, unless you have your own, major things that you're working through, as often as possible, let your kids see you eating those healthy foods. But for you, it might be having just a more like put it on your plate and admit like, I don't really like this food, but I'm going to put a little bit on my plate and I'm going to consider taking a bite. Be honest with your approach to it.
Yeah, I have really worked on as an adult liking more vegetables. And so that is something that I work on modeling with the kids. But definitely like our oldest it's very tough to get him to eat a vegetable. So just showing like modeling that we're eating it.
Yeah. And and just include it with the meal as often as possible.
Yes, like it's going on the plate, but it does not have to go into your body and be totally consumed. You don't have to finish your plate. That's a big thing we definitely don't do at our house.
Right. That's good. I used to call this the eat it or starve method of parenting, and it sounds a lot harsher than it really is. The parent's job is to provide the food, and the kid's job is to eat it or not.
Yes.
So you offer the food, and if they don't want to, you respect that. But the kitchen is closed, right? So often then the kid wants to raid the pantry and get the chips and the junk food. And so a part of that authoritative style of parenting is determining what kinds of foods will be offered, but also when we're eating. Like these are the meal times in our family. These are the snack times. If you choose not to eat at this time, that's fine. It's your choice. You are welcome to try again at the next scheduled eating interval.
Yes.
So allowing them to sort of graze and raid the snack closet between meals is less effective because then they're not hungry at meal times.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
If you're expecting or have a very young infant who hasn't yet started eating solids, one of the things you can do between the ages of 6 and 12 months of age, offer a variety of different flavors, textures, and colors. So let the child see and smell and feel, babies are going to be smearing it all over their face and in their hair, even bitter flavors, spinach, kale, things like that we maybe traditionally don't associate with baby foods. Because if they can be exposed to those flavors before the age of 1, even if they go through a picky phase as a toddler, they're more likely to come back around and accept them later. So that's another thing that you can do. Also, trying not to offer a lot of juice or milk between meals. Water is best between meals. If they're filling up on milk, they're not going to be hungry for their food. Also, juice, it's full of sugar. I've said this many times. It's better to eat your fruit than drink it. And so just try to stay away from those. Milk a few times a day at the table and water between. That's another strategy that parents can try. Repetition is key.
Okay.
And introducing your child to a food multiple times, having it as part of the meal, even up to 15 times, according to the evidence and the studies. And I think that's an important point, that there's something called neophobia, that toddlers are afraid of something new, and they have to really be familiar with it before they'll even consider trying it. That comes with a little bit of a caveat because, like you said, meat and even other fresh, healthy foods are expensive and the grocery bill is going up and up. And I know families who either struggle with food insecurity or even if you're not really food insecure, the grocery bill is a big part of the budget and people don't want to buy something 15 times that they think is going to go in the trash.
Right.
That's a harder one to follow.
One thing for us, especially because I know that my son, he just has a really hard time trying foods. When my kids went to preschool, I always packed their lunch and I just always packed them the exact same thing because it was easy for me, easy for them. They know what to expect. I can do it with my mind shut off. But then when they started going to public school, my oldest two, their school offers free lunch for everybody. You don't have to qualify. And I knew that there's one lunch option that they always like. It's one of those Uncrustable sandwiches and chips. And if they could have that as an option every day, then they would feel okay with that. But then they would also have the option every day of going through the line and looking to see what other foods they had prepared in the cafeteria. So chicken one day, and I think they make spaghetti. And I know it's not always the healthiest foods, but just having the option to look at this food, to decide what I want and to take it back and eat it, I thought was really powerful. And honestly, my kids have done fine doing that. Drew has been doing that for 2 years, having the free lunch every day. And I know it's just another opportunity for him to try something new, maybe to look to see what other people are eating, to see other people eating the same food as him. And I think that's been kind of an easy strategy for us to implement. And then he can get exposed to those same foods over and over, and I don't have to buy them.
Good point. And sometimes peer pressure works in our favor, right? If you see the other kids eating that. Another story about my oldest, Catherine, when she first went to daycare, they would tell me oh, she ate this food and that food. And I flat out called them a liar. I was like, she will not touch that food. You are lying. I know she's not eating that. And they're like, no, really? We promise she's eating it. And I think it was because the other kids in the daycare were eating it. And so she would eat it. Now she got home, forget it. She wouldn't touch it. But
it's only a daycare food.
Right. So that's good if you're in a district. And that I think highlights why it's so important for the schools to offer healthy foods. And I know they try their hardest and budgets are tight, but we could do better.
We could do better, but I just think it's so important for them to have exposure to so many different foods. And I'll go visit them at school and see all the kids are eating the food. And at least for our family, it's been super, super powerful.
That's great. One of the parents that I was talking to said that they like to be creative and make it fun, right? They do the thing where you make the little fruit caterpillar, or they put smiley faces on the pancakes, or, with blueberries and things like that. And those are definitely fun ways to do it. If you have the time and the creative skills, definitely make it fun, make it look appealing. Nobody wants to eat, there's a reason cream spinach is not a favorite. It looks gross.
Exactly.
How do you make it look good? So make it fun. Now, this didn't really work with Catherine. Just forget it. She didn't care what it looked like. She wasn't going to touch it. So, it works for some and not for others.
I need to try that. I feel like all of the the absolute cutest ones are like fruit. And I don't need any help getting my kids to eat fruit. It's all the other stuff that I need help getting them to eat.
Yeah. How do I use this asparagus and make it fun?
Exactly.
Another thing that I think is okay to do, in addition to putting the actual healthy food on the plate in a form that they can see, I think hiding it into things is fine. And some of the comments that I've gotten, spaghetti sauce in particular, you can puree so much stuff, even things like beans, because then you can increase the fiber. A white bean purees well into spaghetti sauce, and spinach, zucchini, all these things, and it tastes great in the sauce. So if your kid likes to eat something with sauce, you can hide a bunch of stuff. But I would also encourage you to put, if you put 3 beans on the plate or a teaspoon of spinach, have it there in a form that they see that, this is a part of what we're eating, because hiding it is not going to get them to necessarily accept the actual food.
Yeah, they're not going to know that they like beans because they didn't know that they were eating beans. I think another one, I think that's really good for kids that are kind of on the verge, but I know a lot of picky eaters don't like sauce. I did not start eating sauce on my spaghetti until I was an adult. And so I think for us, a bigger thing is doing smoothies, because smoothies somehow are less scary.
Right. And they taste like the fruit.
Exactly.
To what degree do you let them help in the kitchen? Because this is another strategy that has been shown in research to be very effective, is at whatever age appropriate level you can, let them help in the shopping and the preparation and all the different stages of food preparation.
Yeah, I would say our least picky eater is the one that helps the most in the kitchen. She loves food. She really also likes to help in our garden. That's just kind of her whole thing. She loves being creative. She loves all that. And she is the least picky. Our pickiest helps me with the shopping. And so I like to really put him in charge of the list. He likes to help me write the list. He marks it all off. So I think getting them involved in that way is helpful. I think one of just the hardest things for us, at least with our oldest, who's the pickiest, is just the evenings are super hard, high emotions everywhere. And so obviously that is the time of day when they would be helping me in the kitchen. And a lot of the times he's just done. So I'm not going to invite him to do that. But our 6-year-old is obsessed with making food and she eats it.
Great. Future chef.
Exactly.
Now, you don't have to do all of these things every single day. And it is important to understand your own family dynamic. So a weekend meal might be the best time. Maybe it's lunch on Saturday when everybody's relaxed and, you have more time to think about it and you're in a good mood. And, that might be the best time to get your oldest to, participate.
Yeah, that's probably true. One thing that we've also worked on is, before we go to the store, we obviously plan out what meals we're going to have and really asking for input. What meal do you want? One thing that they'll always request is fruits, which I think is amazing. That when I say, I'm going to the store, what do you want? And they say a watermelon as opposed to chips. But, I think that's super helpful to have them like help plan ahead what you're going to be making and then see that like, oh, this is a plan. We're thinking about it. And then we're actually going to like kind of put it into play and going to eat it a few days later.
And kids, even at a young age, are so computer and tech savvy. They could even find fun recipes, right? Like, okay, go online. Of course, make sure it's safe, but find, 2 recipes that you think are interesting that we might consider making this week.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of my favorite uses of the internet, and I have been able to find so many fun things to cook that if I had to rely on magazines or cookbooks, I never would have come across. You can just, oh, what's this ingredient? I'm just going to search for recipes with that, and so many thousands come up.
Yeah, that's true. Another thing that we have done is at least our public library has just an amazing children's section, and just looking, like there are cookbooks in the kids section. So like, let's look at these cookbooks. Let's check them out and peruse them and see if there's something that we want to add to our meal this week.
Fun. Yeah, I love our library, right? Some age-appropriate things that they can do. One mom said that she pre-measures all of the spices for a recipe, and then the kid gets to just dump them in.
Oh, yeah. My kids love doing that.
Yeah, and of course, stirring. Most kids can stir. And I saw one thing where, those little boiled egg slicers? It looks like a kind of a clamshell thing, and it's got the little wires, and it just slices the eggs. You can put soft fruit in that, so they can chop up things like strawberries, or if you cook a carrot, or, soft enough that the little wires can go through it. So a toddler can
toddler could totally do that. Yeah, that's awesome.
And my daughter, my special needs daughter, she's 21, but she still enjoys things like she wants to push the buttons on the microwave.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So those are just easy ways to get them involved. This is just healthy habits in general, whether you're an adult just trying to break some bad habits or just to help make it easy for your kids to choose the healthier option, have it out in plain sight. You might even pre-chop it and put it out. I find if I'll cut up the watermelon, put it in a Tupperware in the fridge.
You forget about it.
Yeah, it never gets eaten. If I pull it out every morning and put it on the counter, it's gone.
That is so true. I do that for myself too. If I'm feeling really ambitious, like as soon as I get home from the store, I'll cut up all the veggies that I'm planning on just eating raw and then just having them available. If you're feeling snacky and there is a little carrot out there, you're going to eat it.
And of course, the opposite is true. Either don't buy the chips at all, or at least put them up where they're out of sight and you have to go out of your way to get them.
Yeah.
It's not that we can't ever have chips and junk food, but we have to actually get dressed, get in the car, leave the house to get them. Yeah, you're going to have them a lot less often.
Yeah, so true.
And just to reiterate something you already said, the number one way, according to child development science, to get your kids to accept a wider variety of food is to make mealtime about family time. Make it fun. Ask about their day. You might even consider things like having a family game night or, set up some tradition. Just make it really positive. And you said that right at the start of the episode that, how important that would have been for you.
Yeah, it needs to be just like super positive and memorable and something that kids are not dreading. Like if they know that they are going to be stuck at the table crying, they're not going to want to go to dinner, and they're not like, that's just going to be something that they remember as an adult. And so, yeah, that's something that we definitely need to even improve, but something I think it's super important.
Well, Allie, I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me and to share your story, your experience. I think it's so helpful to hear real life stories, and what works, what doesn't work is going to be an individual experience.
That is so true.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So to sum up what we've talked about today, we talked about the definition of picky eating. What does it mean to be a picky eater compared to, say, a more serious feeding disorder like ARFID? And I want to remind you that our next episode will be an interview with a feeding therapist specifically to talk about these more severe oral aversions, food restrictions, and what you might do about it if your child has one of these serious disorders. We reviewed some risk factors, what kids are more likely to be picky versus more likely to accept a variety of food, and we talked about important strategies that you as a parent can do to help encourage your children in a loving and supportive manner to accept a wider variety of these healthy fruits and vegetables that we know will support their long-term health. Some of the tips you've probably heard before, like offering things multiple times. Other things that we discussed today may have been more of a surprise, like the impact that picky eating has on the emotional state of the child and the family, and some really effective mindfulness-based techniques that you can use to help your child understand what they're experiencing in their body at any given minute. There is a whole world of fun, delicious, exciting food out there to try, and I hope that this episode helps you and your family be able to savor all of it. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to eat your greens. Please be aware that this podcast provides general health information about nutrition and feeding of infants and children and is meant for educational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the important relationship between a parent, child, and pediatrician. If you have concerns about your child's nutrition, health, or growth, please consult your doctor.